We've been talking a lot about everything happening in the presidential race. I mean, this week for obvious reasons. But now the rather really big question is how the change at the top of the Democratic presidential ticket could affect down-ballot races. Some places it will, some places it may not. But Democrats are trying to maintain control of the Senate and, of course, take control of the House. And one of the most interesting races in the country is in Texas, where Democratic Congressman Colin Allred is running for the U.S. Senate against none other than Republican Ted Cruz. Cruz narrowly won his last re-election fight by less than 3 points. And one recent poll showed a tightening race between Allred and Cruz, with Allred trailing by just 3 points, slightly above the margin of error. That poll, taken before President Biden left the race, also showed Biden trailing Donald Trump by a much bigger margin of 9 points. Now, given all the energy around the Kamala Harris candidacy over the last 4 or 5 days, what could it signify for the Texas Senate race? That's one of my questions. Congressman Colin Allred of Texas, candidate for Senate, joins me now. So let me start there. One, I know you know the vice president, you're friends, you've worked together in the past, but you're running a very close race in Texas. It's only been a couple of days, but how has her candidacy at the top of the ticket impacted your race, or has it at this point?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Joe Biden for his 50 years of service. And, you know, Vice President Harris was a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I've known her for some time, and I support her nomination. But even before she got this whole shakeup happened, I was always focused on Texas. I think you know this about me, Jen. I'm a fourth-generation Texan, and my family's from Brownsville. I grew up in Dallas, raised by a single mom. I went to Baylor. It's really important for Texas that we get a senator who cares about all 30 million of us. And as that poll showed, before all of this happened, we were already locked in a really tight race. And now this enthusiasm, I think, will help us bring the good news to our fellow Texans, that they don't have to be embarrassed by their senator. They can get a new one. And that's what we're going to do on November 5th.
Do you hope it's going to help? I mean, it's so early, right? And there's not a lot of state polls. So this is why it's interesting to talk about this. What some of the early polls show is that she has raised enthusiasm among young people, among communities of color. Are you seeing that in Texas at this point?
Certainly have seen it. And I think that's really important, because what we really need to do in Texas is make sure that we get folks out to vote. We've been a non-voting state. I was a voting rights lawyer before I ever came to Congress. This is a struggle that we've had for some time. We have some laws that make it very difficult to vote. But that's not the only thing. We've also had some folks who've decided that they're going to take themselves out of the process. And that's what, having that enthusiasm and having folks on the ground who can help get their neighbors involved becomes so important. And so it's critically important. And I think in an election and in a state where we're dealing with a total ban on abortion with horrific consequences, we have a senator who's too busy podcasting and going on Fox News to actually try and do anything to help our state, and goes off to Cancun when the lights go out. We need to have a change, and this is going to help with that.
I want to play this abortion ad, if we have this ready, and hopefully I think we do. It's a recent abortion ad that you ran because you just mentioned it. And I think it's such an important issue in Texas and across the country.
Let me say at the outset, Kamala can't have my guns, she can't have my gasoline engine, and she sure as hell can't have my steaks and cheeseburgers.
We'll play the ad in a second. So let me just ask you about that, though, first, because there's a lot Ted Cruz has been saying, a lot we can ask you about. That was his attack on Harris. I mean, found that to be so strange. I know that's part of his shtick. She's going to take my steaks and my cheeseburgers. She can't have my guns. What's that all about? Vice President Harris is not taking his cheeseburgers. She's not even taking his guns.
Well, Ted Cruz should be more focused on being a senator, something he hasn't been doing for 12 years. When I mentioned that he's podcasting 3 to 5 times a week, I mentioned that because that means it's hundreds of hours that he's spending not trying to serve 30 million Texans. When we have bipartisan efforts to get things done, whether that's the CHIPS and Science Act or the infrastructure bill, John Cornyn's voting for it, Mitch McConnell's voting for it, Ted Cruz is always voting against it. But also in Texas, we're dealing with an issue at our southern border, and we've seen the numbers coming down, of course, but we still need to have policy changes and resources committed to it. There was a bipartisan effort to try and address that. Ted Cruz proudly took that down. He did that in 2013 as well, when the Gang of Eight and President Obama tried to reach a comprehensive agreement on our immigration reform. We need a senator who actually try and roll up his sleeves and get that done, not one who's spending all their time focusing on other things and trying to get on TV and make points like that.
Are you hopeful? I mean, the vice president, they're already attacking her on this. This is a border bill that was supported by many conservatives, negotiated bipartisan one. It fell apart because of President Trump and Mike Johnson. Are you hopeful the vice president will talk about that more on the trail?
I think we have to, and I think certainly in Texas, I'm talking about it a lot because this is an issue for us. And my family's from Brownsville. It's the tip of Texas. My grandfather was a customs officer there. I see our border communities as not just places you go on kind of political safari. That's the way I think Ted Cruz comes down to the border. He puts on his outdoor clothing, he looks tough, then he comes back to D.C. and doesn't pass any legislation to help. We have folks to point out problems. What we need in a senator is someone to solve those problems. And that's what that bill is an attempt to do. And so when you take that down, and when no state would have benefited more from that bill than Texas, then you should be held accountable for that. And that's what we're going to do in this campaign.
I want to play that abortion ad. We don't have much time left, but I want to play it because it's important for people to see.
It's gotten more dangerous to be a woman in Texas.
And it's Ted Cruz's fault. He fought for an abortion ban that goes too far.
They didn't just make it illegal to have an abortion, they made it illegal for me to do my job.
So whether you were raped or something went tragically wrong and your life is at risk,
women are now forced to flee Texas for care.
That message is so powerful because it's healthcare providers.
Right.
I mean, that is who you're featuring. And why was that so important to feature healthcare providers in that ad?
Well, this is the reality in Texas. My wife and I, we've had two beautiful boys in Dallas in the last 5 years. Jen, you and I both know those rooms are too small to have Ted Cruz in there too. When you get the news that we all hope we don't get, that there's a problem with the pregnancy, and your doctor has to say, there's nothing I can do for you. You're going to have to leave the state. Or that doctor is then worried about their license, worried about their criminal exposure if they treat you. That's not who we are as Texans. If there's one thing I know about us as a fourth-generation Texan, it's that we believe in freedom. And this is not it. It's fundamentally an issue of freedom. And those providers are telling the truth. They're saying what their experience is. And we're also going to see an issue of not having enough providers going forward. This is going to have so many impacts in Texas.
Congressman Allred, I know you have a tough campaign ahead. It's a close campaign. Great talking with you about so many issues.